Welcome back, Honors. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom in our continuing discussion of the Industrial Revolution. Thank you, Pierre. So we're now talking about the Industrial Revolution, right? We picked it up and started it off in class, and we got to the fact that we were actually going to be going through an agricultural revolution before we can go through an industrial revolution. Ha ha ha, nerd. The big thing about it though is we are going to be talking about how we're going to be moving from a intensive labor force system on the farms of Europe, and how that's going to free up, or not Europe necessarily, Great Britain, actually, when we're starting out. And we're going to talk about how it's going to eventually lead to this idea where we're going to not be working all day, and it's going to change things a lot, and it's going to kind of adopt a factory system. But instead of dawdling on that for hi Josie, how are you, sweet girl? Zoe, now, before we actually sit there and talk about that stuff too much, we're actually going to go ahead and jump right into it. And I have a flip that I recorded last year that's actually really, really good that discusses this subject. But I'll see you all in a sec. Now, the thing about it, though, is that open field system was wildly inefficient. Because a third, 30% of your fields were doing nothing. They were just resting, right? They were just literally sitting there being like, oh, we're not going to plant anything here for a year, right? Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense because you should be trying to use as much of the land as absolutely possible. Well, that is going to actually start happening when the agricultural revolution of the 1600s sets in, right? The agricultural revolution of the 1600s will set in with a big, several different series of new inventions that will actually take us from farming like this to take us to farming like, oop, that's just a guy, take us to farming like this, right? In a much more efficient and productive manner, okay? Now, some of these early inventions, which we need to jot down, okay? I need you to jot down these three things, which are very important. One of them is this thing right here. It's called the seed drill, right? The seed drill, like we plant seeds, right? Drill, and it's invented by a man named Jethro Tull, right? Jethrottull, which is also the name of a band from the 1980s and 1970s, which some of your dads might actually know exactly who Jethro Tull is. But Jethro Tull is also an inventor, an English inventor during the late 1600s who's going to develop this device known as the seed drill, right? What it is it actually got rid of an inefficient way of spreading seeds. So in the old way of farming in the open field system, the method used before the seed drill was a method known as casting, right? They would literally have a bag of seeds on their hip, and they would grab a handful of them, and they just throw them, right? Throw them. They cast them out there, right? They're like, ta, 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 ta. And then they would go through and they would prune out the ones that actually look small and weak. Problem with casting is that rain, if it rained immediately after, could like kill some of the seeds. Birds could come and eat a bunch of the seeds. And again, it wasn't very efficient. Whereas the seed drill, on the other hand, instead of requiring tons of people to actually go out there and cast seeds individually, this device could plant entire fields in a day, right? Due to the fact that you would put all the seeds in these little hoppers right here, and then what would happen is you'd have these little like troughs right here that would actually cut into the dirt, creating little narrows. The vibrations would rattle the seeds into the narrows, and then literally you got these little like troughs right here that would just cover the dirt on top of the seeds and tuck them in all nice, right? And the seed drill was a very, very big invention for actually made the like planting of crops much more efficient. Now, the turning of the fields was made more efficient by the iron plow, right? The iron plow was invented in this region of England called Rotherham, Rotherham. It's called the Rotherham plow. And an iron plow was just much better because it could be dragged by an ox or a horse or a mule, and it had a metal tip on the plow, so it made it so not every single individual had to go into these communal these communal areas and use a hoe to like actually turn everything over, right? And then another big thing as well is going to be the enclosure system, right? Rather than using giant communal fields, lords instead closed the land in and made it more efficient because they now have these tools to make it so one family needs them to farm each individual patch rather than an entire village necessary for farming communal property, right? So now we've got this one family can be in charge of this, and this one family can be in charge of this, and it's going to make everything wildly more efficient, right? So the English are going to bring upon these things in the 1600s, and these developments are going to require a lot less labor on farms, right? So the thing about it is, though, is that many people at this point don't start moving to the city. Some do. Some actually lose their jobs and stuff like that, or let go from their land leases and things like that, and these serfs become peasants and move to villages or to cities to find work. But a lot of them actually start making money at their homes at an hourly rate, right? Now, we'll talk about that here in about 2 seconds because it's called the Industrious Revolution, but a lot of people are going to start using their spare time to make money at an hourly rate. And if you're making money at an hourly rate, that's going to cause a consumer revolution, and people are going to have money in their pockets to go out and buy things, which is really big. Now, another thing that does come along as well to help famine resistance is something that, of course, the Dutch created because they're the best, right? The Dutch are actually going to create this system, and they're also known as the Low Countries at this point, this system known as crop rotation, right? Now, crop rotations is when the landowners would assign to each enclosure and family a specific crop, which is going to help increase yields, right? They're going to be like, all right, Strimlau family, you're planting turnips this year. All right, the Sauvage family, you're planting clover this year. The Meyer family is planting barley, and then the Wolf family is going to plant wheat, right? And then following the next year, they would just simply take the crops and rotate them, right? Because certain crops do not only take nutrients from soil, but certain ones of them actually give nutrients back to soil, which is a very, very interesting thing. This is going to actually require, again, less people, because one family can farm this one specific product throughout the year, and it's going to be much more efficient, and there's going to be even more time to work on the side. Now, this right here is the original crop rotation system actually created by the Dutch, and who's going to actually bring it to England is this guy named Robert Townshend, right? And his nickname was called the Turnip, right? They called him Robert Turnip Townshend, right? So the thing about it, though, is that he actually brings this in. He's like, look, the Dutch have been doing this phenomenally well. Not only are they reclamating land and taking it back from the ocean, which is absolutely bananas, we're not going to get into that right now, but they also created this system to where literally if you use this 4-field crop rotation system, the soil will be perfectly usable every single year. Because when you rotate them, there's 2 very important ones in here. Barley and wheat, we know what they're made for. It's used for making beer and also for making bread, right? Mainly for making bread. The turnips right here, though, are really important because they're a winter crop that can actually also keep people alive as a very good food staple. And the other big thing about it is you can't harvest every turnip because they actually bud off of each other, kind of like potatoes do. And the reason why is you can eat the greens, but when they bud off of one another, some of them will be left behind in the soil, will die, and turn into natural compost, right? Clover, on the other hand, was planted not for eating, but for farm animals to eat. It was a pasture crop, right? And what happens when farm animals eat bunches of clover? They poop. And when they poop, that manure actually goes into the soil and creates a more nutritious system, and then we actually have better soil for the turnips. And then we literally keep just rotating them throughout. And these crop rotational systems are going to make better crop yields year to year and require less and less people and make us even more famine resistant, right? But speaking of that, working on the side thing, right? We got to talk about that side hustle, all right? The side hustle is very important. I have a side hustle. I ref lacrosse games in the area, right? The side hustle's big, right? You want to make a little bit of extra money, something that your Lord is not necessarily giving you. This is going to be known as the Industrious Revolution, right? The Industrious Revolution, which came before industrial, right? Notice those 2 differences in words, is going to start up in the late 1600s, okay? This is now when people had time to work outside of farming because it didn't take you all day anymore. You only dedicated a few hours of your day to farming, but you're not going to sit there and stare at the plants while they grow, right? I mean, I actually kind of do that a little bit. I literally check on my plants every day. I got some zucchini that are making flowers right now, and I'm very excited about it. Now, the thing about it, though, is they begin to work at an hourly rate in their homes, right? This right here is what the Industrious Revolution looked like, right? Families could actually dedicate different members of their family to certain jobs, and most of them actually applied to textiles, right? And this was known as the cottage industry. But the interesting part about it is you could lump all the cottages together, right? And it adopted this thing known as the putting out system. So we talked about the Strimlau, the Sauvage, the Meyer, and the Wolf family, right? Well, y'all aren't working all the time every single day. So what is going to happen is merchants from the cities are going to start showing up to y'all. And they're going to be like, hey, look, this is what we're going to do. The Wolf family, since you're not working all day every day, you're going to be my carders, which means you're going to take these wire combs and you're going to actually separate this cloth and you're going to make it, you're going to card it out so there's no clumps or knots in it, right? You're going to take that cloth, now carded cloth, over to the Meyer family. And the Meyer family is going to be in charge of spinning it, right? They're going to spin it into threads and into yarns and stuff like that, right? And then we're going to take that over to the Sauvage and the Strimlau family, and their families have these giant looms, and they're going to actually loom it all into cloth, right? The merchant then goes to the last 2 families, picks up the finished product, goes back to the villages, goes back to the ports, and sells it at a higher price, right? But the interesting thing about this Industrious Revolution is when you lump all those cottages together, it's called the putting out system, right? The putting out system was when it was all made in steps, right? So with this, though, it's not only going to provide more wages for the workers, it's going to also stimulate the economy in Great Britain, and it's going to create a massive textile market, right? A stable textile market. Now, why textiles, right? Like, why is textiles the things that are going to be being made in Great Britain during in the putting out system during the agricultural revolution, which is primarily happening in this area? Now, the Industrious Revolution in the cottage industry did pop up in other areas as well, in areas like northern France and like Brittany, as well as like in the areas that you would now call Burgundy and eastern France. It did go down there, but it did not. It happened in a major influx in areas like Great Britain, right? So why textiles, though? Well, a lot of it has to do with the fact that Great Britain has easy access to two key products that actually make the yarn and the thread and stuff like that. And what it is sheep's wool, which actually sheep and sheep herding and sheep farming has been a massive industry in Great Britain, and it is even to this day. There are 6th, 7th, 18th generation families in Great Britain that still continue to farm sheep to provide like actual wool yarn to the textile industry, right? The other thing about it is that Britain had now actually become very, very infamous and famous for having their colonies grow cotton, right? Now, the thing about cotton, though, is where they were growing it, a lot of people immediately say, oh, in the Americas. Really quickly, India is actually where they actually grew the biggest bases of their cotton early on, right? And the cotton, though, the supply of it coming in through the ports due to the EIC and the East India Company is actually going to provide a very, very stable market for thread, right? So big thing about it, though, is now we're making textiles. We're making it all by hand. We got this putting out system, right? Now you can see the seeds of the Industrial Revolution, right? You got guys coming up, right? People walking up right now, and they're like, wait a minute. If we made all this stuff faster, we could actually make more money, and we could actually charge more prices for them, or like higher prices for these goods, or necessarily lower depending on the supply. So the thing about it, though, is then the inventors come along, and they create these key inventions that actually make it so you can make textiles much quicker, right? So now early on in the looming process, right, the Sauvage, the Strimlau family, y'all are sitting there like making these looms or like looming all this stuff by hand with this giant loom that you had in your house. Well, what would actually have to happen is like a child would actually take the thread and actually weave it in there one after another, and then run back to the other side and do it again, and then run back to the other side and do it again, right? So like now, problem is that was going decently fast, but an inventor by the name of John Kay comes along, and he invents this thing called the flying shuttle, right? And the flying shuttle is this canoe-looking thing right here, but it actually is only about the size of like a small ruler, right? It's only about the size, about 8 inches long, and it's got little wheels on the bottom of it, and it's got thread right here. And instead of having a child go blah, 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 it sits on a little wooden chute, and you would just separate the threads a little bit and go pop, and it would go zip, and it would just like zip down to the other end. You'd switch the threads, pop, zip, like almost like a typewriter top, right? We could just zip it back and forth, which made the cloth much faster. Well, due to that, now that we can make cloth much faster with a flying shuttle, it's going to increase the demand for thread, right? And so the thread's going to need to be made much faster. Now, the problem is that before the Industrial Revolution, you had to use a spinning wheel, and it can make one thread at one time. But then Richard Arkwright comes along and creates the spinning jenny, right? And the spinning jenny actually has a handle on it, and one person can sit there and crank this handle, and what it does is it spins multiple threads all at once. Some could spin 10, some could spin as many as 100, right? Well, then another like inventor named Samuel Crompton comes along and invents this device known as the water frame, right? And the water frame actually replaces the worker who's cranking it like this and actually uses a water wheel. I know, Elena, you knew what this was, right? In like your last class, and it actually replaces it with a water wheel and uses a stream to power it rather than a person with their hand. And the water frame could actually make thicker yarn that wouldn't break as easily. So that's really, really big. And so you can see if you take a bunch of water frames or a bunch of spinning jennies or a bunch of looms and you slap those into a building together, you now have a factory, right? The Industrial Revolution doesn't necessarily have to be steam engines and power and smelting and all that stuff very early on. The earliest forms of the Industrial Revolution actually had to do with the creation of textiles using simple machinery, right? But we are beginning to mechanize right here, right? We are beginning to create factory systems that have machines inside them that are creating all these different products, right? These devices are that early mechanization, right? All they need now really is a more consistent power source, right? Because the thing about it is, flying shuttle, I'm using my hands, right? I'm using people to do this. The spinning jenny, someone's using their hands, and they're cranking these things, right? Very, very slowly, okay? This right here, water frame. What if there's a drought? Now what are we going to do? We just going to get Katie Morrell to sit there and climb on the water wheel to just keep moving that axle around? Probably not, right? We need to find a better way and a better power source, right? So the thing about it is that power source is going to be found. But finding the power source did take a little bit of some time, right? Because due to the fact that you had the growth in these different items, right? Like these different items, like these textile items, and also some of the components on these early machines had to be made out of metal. Like as you saw the flying shuttle, the tips of it are made out of metal. These early machines and also the early increases in transportation, the more use of wagons and horses and carts and things like that is going to require more metal components, right? So it increased the need to mine iron, right? Well, the thing about it is when you mine iron, you got to smelt it, right? Smelting is a very, very intrinsic process that some of you might have actually experienced in Minecraft before, right? Taking a piece of raw iron, right? But the problem is that raw iron, because it actually has a very certain melting point and stuff like that, and it's all not just these big lumps like sitting underground. You actually have to get it out of the rock, right? So like you mine a piece of rock out of the ground and it's got iron flecked all on the inside of it. You break that rock up, now I gotta get the iron out. How do I do that? I'm not gonna sit here and tick away at it. Instead, if I throw the rock into a massive furnace, and these are what the earliest smelters looked like, they were literally furnaces that sat on farmland and stuff like that. You throw that rock in there and heat it up to a certain temperature, the iron will melt out of the rock. And that is what our smelting process is, right? So due to that, you need coal and iron for the iron production process. Well, when this all goes down, where do you get iron and coal from? You get them from mines. And just like in New Orleans as well as in England, if you keep digging these mines deeper and deeper and deeper, they're going to begin to fill with water, right? Like you're going to start hitting aquifers or underground rivers or underground streams, and your mines are going to fill with water. How do you get the water out? You bail it out, right? You literally take buckets and you run it out of there. The earliest forms of actually using this, the earliest forms of actually using a bailing out system was a horse stood up on top of the above ground next to a pole, and he would walk around the pole. It would turn a little pulley, and it would send a rope down into the mine with buckets and pull it out. Literally, that's the origin of the phrase horsepower, due to the fact that these devices were created to actually mechanize the pulling of water out of mines, right? And those devices were called steam engines. The earliest ones were invented by these inventors named Thomas Savery and John Newcomen, right? John Newcomen and Thomas Savery invented the very, very earliest steam engines that actually pulled water out of mines. Now, the thing about these early steam engines, though, that they created to get the water out of the mines, people didn't even realize how many limitless applications they would have when they were fixed. The earliest ones didn't have certain parts on them, and they would break all the time. But in the mid-1700s, this man shows up. James Watt, a Scottish inventor and tinkerer, was called in to fix a Savery and Newcomen steam engine that was used to bail out mine water, right? And he added a very specific part onto one of them to actually redesign the steam engine completely, and it's this device right here. It's called a condenser. When it actually would save some of the steam output, condense it onto the side of a metal cylinder, and refeed it into the hopper into the very, very bottom. Now, the thing about it is with this condenser, you don't have to fill it with water constantly. That means that the James Watt steam engine can now be added on to everything, right? You could actually make a big one or a small one. You could slap it on the wheels and make a locomotive. You could slap it onto a loom and make it automatic. You could use anything for it, and we still use Watt steam engines to produce power in the modern era, right? Hence why the electricity that comes out of your sockets is called watts, right? So steam engines were the power source that factories needed. So now you're going to see an explosion of urbanization and migration when people begin to move to cities because the factories don't need to be next to streams anymore for the water frame. They can now be placed anywhere, right? But that right there is where we're going to wrap everything up, and we're going to talk about the effects of urbanization and migration in the Industrial Revolution when I see y'all next in class. Great job today. Y'all keep killing the game. Good luck on your ACT. I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.